Greetings, everybody. This is Christopher Messina coming at you from the Messy Time Studios, as ever, from the beautiful beaches of the last free state in America, Florida. It is late in the evening on August 5th, 2023, and I'm joined in the studios today by Brandon and Zach of the I Came With Fire podcast. Gentlemen, thank you
Yeah.
so much.
I thought we were doing an I Came With Fire podcast episode, but we can do both. Let's do both. I like that idea.
I'm flexible. I'm completely flexible.
Let's do it.
Well, let's
Perfect.
Yeah, then cross-interrogate each other. So
Okay.
well,
Yeah. I'll yield the floor to you, Chris. You go right ahead.
Sure. So, we at Messy Times, we cover a wide range of topics, and a huge chunk of it happens to be international security related, whether from the private sector or from kind of helping the 93% of Americans who actually have nothing to do with the military understand the military a little bit better. So, oftentimes I'm interviewing retired folks for either combat control in the Air Force. I'm on the board of the foundation there, or for other branches of the military. And it is a rare treat today because you two are actually active duty. So
We are.
Yep. It's maybe you could give a little color on what you all do and fill that in for those people out there wondering about a military career.
Let's do it. You go ahead, Zach.
Yeah, so if you're interested in a military career, you got to first start with a recruiter, which is what I used to do. Just recently, for 3 years, I was an Air Force recruiter, just putting people in the Air Force, filling slots, changing people's lives, all that type of stuff. But currently what I do, so I'm a tech sergeant. I currently am a sit-in. We call them undershirts, but I'm like the first sergeant for my unit. I deal with health, morale, and welfare, and mostly deal with a whole bunch of small fires from NCOs who you think could be able to deal with things on their own, who are still technically airmen at heart. So I have to fix those things. And then
Right.
I'm doing that until about spring of next year, and then hopefully back off to security forces, which was my original job, which military police. So that's me.
That's awesome. And just, I had heard a bit that recruiting in the last couple of years has been more challenging than it has in the past. Is that true? Or is it, in your experience, kind of about the same?
So I think it's different branch to branch. They all kind of tackle that problem differently. The Air Force is still making goal. I think we're currently on track to not make it this year, which would be the first time since before 1991, I want to think.
Wow.
But the Air Force tends to somehow pull it out of its ass. We almost didn't make goal last year, and then we succeeded it. So I wouldn't count us out yet, at least. I know the Army and Navy didn't make goal last year, and the Marines made goal on the last day of the fiscal year at the last hour or something. So it is harder.
Marines are clutch.
The Air Force, the Air Force definitely has something different than the other branches. So we tend to not be too worried about it, but leadership is still worried about it for sure.
That's interesting. And for what you're looking at, is it across the scale? Are you going everything from pilots to mechanics to regular service airmen? Is it just whoever walks in the door, whatever their kind of pre-existing qualifications might be, will lead you towards what you think they can do? Or are you pitching a whole suite of stuff that anyone can strive for and try out for?
So in Air Force recruiting, we actually don't pitch any job specifically at all. We pitch the Air Force. So I'm just going to explain to you you can travel, you can serve your country. There's the community college of the Air Force, get your GI Bill, here's your set pay, all that type of stuff. That's what we sell you on. When it comes down to jobs, it really doesn't matter what you did before. You're coming in at an entry level technically. So you could be the best engineer ever. We're going to make you a cop. So it kind of just...
Right.
kind of where it falls, it's where the numbers.
That's not the
wisest
thing to do.
Yeah, there's some give or take. There are tests they take. They take a test called the TAPAS, which will determine their emotionality. They'll see if they like to work outside, if they like to work with their hands, all this type of stuff. The Air Force has been doing that for the last 8-ish years. They take the ASVAB, obviously, which tells us if they're good at mechanics or admin or something else. So we take all these tests, and that tells us what they should be good at. And then from there and what their interest is, we then fine tune their jobs. But enlisted, there's no pilot positions. We're the only, I think it's 2% of the Air Force flies. I can't remember the exact percentage. So the other 90%.
Except RPAs, right?
No, enlisted don't fly RPAs anymore either.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. So those are now all lieutenants.
What's the RPA, Zach?
Captains now. It's a remote pilot aircraft. So it's like the drones, the Reapers, the Predators, which I don't think we call them Predators anymore because that's offensive for some reason. But so yeah, there's
accurate.
Yeah, right.
yeah. It is a Predator.
Coming to the trend of naming things for what they aren't anymore. So
yeah, right.
Peacekeeper instead of Predator.
Exactly.
Oh, it's definitely keeping peace with some Tomahawks.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Enlisted don't fly those anymore.
Or is that
we still call them Tomahawks? Sure they're still called Tomahawk missiles. Yeah.
Tomahawk missiles. Yeah.
That's not been called. I don't want to give any Washington any ideas, but that sounds like cultural appropriation. But so
yeah, you're kind of like thinking like how the NFL got rid of the Redskins. Yeah, no, we still call them Tomahawks.
Good for you. Cool. And Brandon, what do you do in your day job?
So I'm security forces also. By trade, I've been at it for almost 14 years. Zach and I actually met on deployed doing security forces duties in Africa. But I've been at Malmstrom doing security for some pretty big missiles. And then I was at Vogelway Air Station, which is in Germany, which is the law enforcement hub of like the DoD for sure. Oh. So it's a joint Army and Air Force unit, very, very busy. And then the Air Force decided to send me to California. So I'm here now. And like I said before, I work with AFWorks and I do innovation, essentially. Just put it that way. Right. But been at it for almost 14 years. Military brat. Grew up all over the world because my dad was active duty. And that's kind of me in a nutshell. But you can ask me whatever you want to know.
Now, I'm curious, but certainly for those folks on the business end who are smaller businesses who have been trying to get more engaged with military contracting or government contracting, there's been a larger trend. I go back to the Obama administration, I think, to really trying to not make it just only Lockheed Martin and Raytheon can apply. But if you have something useful, then you can become part of one of these innovation tracks. So that's the group you're
exactly. With. So I do several different things aside from working with smaller companies. So I have some skills that the Air Force uses. One of them is 3D printing, drafting. So I do that. So we work mostly with smaller companies that are seeking to solve more niche problems for the Air Force. There's a lot of different things, whether that's from trying to solve weight issues or consumable issues, stuff like that. We deal with those. And it's, like I said, more on a niche local level, but we do a lot of different things for a lot of different bases. And my job is growing, like you said, the innovation side of the Air Force is trying to become a lot more prevalent. Where I'm at kind of leads the way. We're the original. But some other bases, especially some of the bigger bases in the Air Force, are developing their innovation cells quite a bit, modeling it kind of after us. But so it's a very cool job. It's something that I have loved doing. It's not my favorite job in the Air Force. I know that probably makes me crazy because I'm security forces. My favorite job was definitely at Vogelway. Just the tempo and the ops there. It was amazing, the camaraderie, but it is one of the coolest jobs and most unique jobs I've ever done. And I've taken a lot away from it that I can translate to the outside. So that definitely makes it the most efficient job and the most useful job I've ever had. So no intention of doing law enforcement on the outside.
No, well, sure. And I was kind of curious about that. Is it, you haven't been a policeman in the private sector. So, is it somewhat harder or easier to deal with, an out of control service member that needs some curtailing? I gather a lot, is the stereotype of the drunken brawl downtown on Saturday night still hold true?
It is. I mean, having never, like you said, never been a cop on the outside, right? I'm sure people punching you in the face feels the same either way. But, we do deal with the people that get trained to punch people in the face. Right. And I feel like you're probably on the sliding scale dealing with more dangerous people on average, I'd say, than police. But the one thing I will say that it is different and probably a lot safer is I feel like civilian police deal with more armed
Right.
perpetrators than we do,
Right.
just because of the on base aspect. Yeah, I mean, it's where I was at in Germany is all off base. We work side by side with Polizei, German police, and if you think that American cops will beat your ass, the Germans will one up you every day, for sure. They don't even have probable cause laws in Germany. So,
Oh.
yeah,
American
we get
folks just don't know how good they have it.
Yeah, I guess, you know,
True.
you could get pulled over for driving while American, what we joke about over there. And that's it. You know, your car is now their car. So,
Yep.
Yeah, I think that it's probably on average, probably more dangerous to be a cop as a civilian. But yeah,
Sure.
would be my estimation.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to kind of say too. Yeah. My buddy, Frankie, he's a new cop. He's been a cop for a couple months now. And in his couple months, he's responded to some of the craziest things that I've only responded to like once, like in my 12 plus years of being a cop. And it's not to say that we don't respond to some crazy stuff. My first base was Kadena Air Base in Japan, and I responded to an Army sergeant who was living on base who had a meth lab in his kitchen.
Oh,
so like.
Which
There's
the best place to make
is against military regulations.
It is.
Yes.
It is.
Yeah.
Surprisingly so.
I'm pretty sure it's against.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it's against every regulation.
You're right.
But,
it's pretty messed
up.
Entrepreneurial sergeant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is innovation, Marine innovation, or Army innovation. Yeah.
Soldier innovation.
Sorry. Yeah.
I'll do a quick rundown of the story. Yeah. He would call the desk, so 911 or whatever, and he would say like someone's trying to break into our house, and so we would show up. But even on base, they still have like they live on a house. Like you can't just walk in. Like you still need like probable cause, or you need like the base commander to say yeah, go ahead, like your warrant pretty much. And we would show up, and he would say, we'd be like, well, are they in your house? He'd be like, no. So then he wouldn't let us in. And then we'd walk around, we'd check, and I'd be like, all right, man, well, there's nothing going on. See you later. And that happened a couple times until one day he walked into, like at 2 o'clock in the morning, he walked into the security forces unit. He was covered in purple, like a purple smoke grenade had gone off, and he'd walked like through it or something. And he's carrying his daughter, and he's with his wife, and he's like, they're in my house. They're in my house right now. And so we're like, whoa, okay. So we just code 3, which is, lights and sirens to his house. I'd been there enough times. I knew exactly where it was. And I walk up and the front door's open. There's a purple smoke grenade going off in the front yard. I'm like, what the heck is this? This is one of the few times I actually drew my gun as a security forces member. Yeah. I was like, this dude's being attacked by like ninjas because we're in Japan, or the his local military buddy's gone nuts, and he's attacking him or something. So I draw my gun, my alpha shows up, or like police 2 shows up a couple seconds later. And I walk in, I'm clearing it, and I'm like, security forces. And I take the corner and meth lab. And the second I saw the meth lab, I was like, okay, I just put my gun away.
It all makes sense again.
Yeah. Yeah. He was getting high off his own supply.
No one's ever been breaking into his house. You're just lucky he hadn't rigged it with grenades. Jesus. That's crazy.
Yeah, he was just paranoid. And then when we got a statement later, he was hilarious because he was fully like compliant, and he's like, yeah, there was he said ninjas. He was like, there's these ninjas trying to break into my house, so I had to like pop smoke and egress with my family. Thanks for saving me. I was like, yeah, no problem, man. I was like, and about the meth lab, like, what's that about?
Yeah.
And he's like, oh, we were tight on cash. So kind of doing a little side hustle. I'm like, all right, man, that's good. Write that down.
Spontaneous utterance, go.
That's great. Yeah.
There's bad apples in every bunch.
No, I'm sure. It's funny. A good friend of mine became a cop in New York, and he just endless stories, just one after the other. The craziest, the one that I love the most, just because it's so absurd. They're in like precinct in East New York, and he's now a desk sergeant. Like, so he got a promotion, and he's no longer walking a beat, but he's the desk sergeant.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy, it's like a sleepy, afternoon in the summertime, and this guy walks in. He's probably in his like early 60s, he's like, "That's it. I'm tired of running. I'm turning myself in." And everyone's looking at him like, "Who are you?" And he gives them a name, and they're like, "Who?" Right? They have been looking for this guy. Who was like, "Well, I'm tired. I'm giving myself up. I'm tired of this." Like, well, all right, hold on. So they pat him down and like cuff him to a chair, and then one of them gets the bright idea to go on the internet. Number 8 on like the outstanding FBI top 10 most wanted. Like he's a Black
Holy
Panther
crap.
and a gangbanger who like committed a string of bombings and murders in like the 60s. And so, but he's been living like around the block from the police station for 30 years. And no one
Keep your friends close and your enemies closer.
And he just
right under their nose.
He'd found religion. He decided it was no longer tenable to be running, and they're looking at him like, "Oh God!" And the funny thing was, I thought, "Well, you got a big collar," and it's like, "You're just not thinking like a cop." No, what I got was paperwork, and so when this happens, you have to like wait for the feds. Whoever makes the collar has to wait for the feds to show up, and it's like 11 o'clock on a Tuesday. And so I turned around to one of my subordinates and like, "You arrest him." He's like, "Oh, come on, Sarge, I don't want to." Anyway, so well, that's cool. So do you guys like it career as far as you can tell, and someday you retire, maybe.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
that's all.
Yeah, no, I think that along with your guy, Zach's guy probably had a subconscious, guilty subconscious if he kept walking into the police station after he'd get high on his own supply. Just wanted somebody to catch him, man.
Mm-hmm. I think he was just high on his own supply, thinking we were like bugging his house or something, like ninjas were there. Like
I don't know. Seems pretty counterintuitive to your meth operation.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh, that's cool. So that's one pathway through the military that you guys endorse heavily. That you're going to get a lot of not necessarily the kind of frontline action that you might expect going into the military, but plenty of action.
Yeah. No, I thought you were getting at making meth as a way to get through the military. It's a way to get out of the military for sure.
As your man said, money gets tight.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
It could if you're a very bad NCO and manage money.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Probably was a bad first sergeant too.
Exactly.
Aren't you glad you're not that guy's troop, or he's not your troop?
Oh, thank God.
So I want to hear how you came to be the CEO of Tanbreez and the largest rare earth mineral mine. I want to hear about that because that is definitely a topic that has grown over the past couple of years, especially with COVID bringing to light a lot of different things supply chain wise. But yeah, I want to hear about this because it's something that Zach and I talk about pretty frequently.
Sure. Well, I'll be very brief, but I get a lot of questions about how do you get there, right? And when in their 20s getting out of college, like, what's my path from here to there? And my career path. You ever do any improv theater?
Only in high school.
I did,
because I did
high school.
That's it. So you remember rule number 1, right? Is when you're handed a line, you say yes and, because if you say no, the story stops. So without meaning to, my career was largely improv. I grew up in New York. I went to the University of Chicago. Ended up with a degree in anthropology, Arabic, and Islamic history, and then I worked throughout North and South Africa for a number of years. Came back to New York. Went to work for a big investment bank in the late 90s. Learned a huge amount there, and basically my career has been split halfway between advanced financial technology, what is cool to call fintech these days, building exchanges, trading markets, trading systems, helping take a lot of the futures exchanges and stock exchanges, which were all open outcry, guys in funny colored jackets yelling at each other, turning that electronic. So kind of huge amounts of market efficiency stuff, very sort of wonky technical sort of stuff. And then the other half was around commodities and commodity financing and trading. And a chunk of that was because, so put my hand up, someone said, does anyone know anything about the Sharia finance stuff? I know about this Islamic finance stuff. I later, when I knew a lot of friends in the Navy who taught me the phrase voluntold, I was like, great, terrific. You're on the next plane to Dubai. We're working on a transaction, which is great. So a lot of Sharia compliant financing revolves around physical assets, right? He's not allowed to charge interest in the abstract because that's against the will of God. And so, for a range of reasons, I just had to work on a lot of innovation. So, a lot of my background was finance and how you trade commodities better, more efficiently, make more money off it. And along the way, since I came from a kind of national security based family, I've always done a lot of work from the private sector side in national security, a lot of public-private partnerships, a lot of engagement with multiple administrations, with multiple the Pentagon, and with a lot of the Officer Corps around whether strategy or tactics relating to how the private markets will impact security. Some of my you'll relate. Some of my most amusing moments are there's nothing better than getting a 2 or 3 star admiral or general who is used to being in control, right? And I had this one back and forth. We had a long 2-day seminar at SOCOM in Florida with a bunch of brass talking to them, and we gave a big talk on the oil markets. And I had this 3-star general who was like, "Look, if oil were $65.50 a barrel, I'd have peace, and I'd fucking like that." Right? Like it would just where his region is like that would just make things better. So why can't we just make it $65.50? I tried to explain to him, General, if you would like to control the price of an oil market and you would like to do it more effectively than OPEC, I can do it for you, but I'm going to need a balance sheet of about $8 trillion to trade with. And that he didn't like that. He just didn't like the idea that you couldn't order the price to be something. And that's just very much a difference between kind of a command and control
your military mind
and a private sector mind where we are never in control of the price, right? You have to be able to react to prices. So, along the way, about 7 or 8 years ago, I was actually working on a project helping the Navy supply chain figure out how to both more cheaply and more securely deliver jet fuel to Bagram Air Force Base. So, the idea was, as you well know, it's not just the price of the fuel, but if you could disrupt that supply chain, or if you could put contaminants in that fuel before it even gets to the plane, that's an even easier way to win this battle than trying to fight an F-16, right? So, so we were doing a lot of work on that and trying to help the Navy figure out if there were ways that we could actually improve that. Along the way, Pentagon asked me to spend time with the Afghan Minister of Mines, who was trying to flog a bunch of mining properties, which were very rich. But Alexander the Great knew they were there. This is not news. This is not a new idea. And as part of that, I got to really start to look at the rare earth supply chain, which is how we get closer to Tanbreez, and realized that here was a problem that was eminently fixable from the private sector perspective, right? A lot of, especially DC policy types, they focus on what the government can do, which is often ineffectual for a range of reasons. They're not nimble, they can't move fast enough, they can't be traders. And we looked at this, and I said, well, we can fix this in the private sector. I don't need any help from the government. You just need to let us do what we can do. Deng Xiaoping in the 70s and 80s in China, he started this whole thing. If the Saudis have oil, China has rare earths. And I give Deng, Chairman Deng, just a quite frankly, objectively, a huge amount of credit to realize that in 1982 or 76, whatever the time frame was, that these materials, which there always had uses in electronics, always had uses in miniaturization, but they were nowhere, the industrialization and miniaturization that later came, right? He foresaw that. Whether he foresaw that the iPhone is irrelevant, he foresaw that industrialization would move towards miniaturization and transportation uses that would require this huge demand. I just give him huge credit for that, or his team, whoever. That was very impressive.
It takes an incredible amount of foresight, honestly, especially back then.
Yeah, 50 years in advance. Very smart. So the upshot is China has been very good at investing in their own people, investing in their own economy. Of course, the politicians and the newspapers like to make it, to be this good versus evil story. It's not, right? China has got their own, particular issues. One thing I found most fascinating, and this is not tangential, this is kind of important to the story, I think, that I just think is the way maps are made, right? No one is surprised to hear that England or Japan are not self-sufficient in food and material, right? That doesn't come as a surprise. You got a lot of people on a small island.
Islands.
But people look at China and they make the mistake that it is self-sufficient. It is not. Here in America, we have everything we need. We have all the energy. We have all the food we need. We can stay here on our own happy little fortress with 2 oceans and we can live forever. China cannot. And they've suffered great famines, even in the last 60 years, because they were not able to import. So the Chinese, communists or not, preoccupation with having enough inputs to their economy drive a lot of their decision making. To me, that's not particularly nefarious. It's just reality. When it came to the rare earths industry, they had a huge amount of deposits in these ionic clays in China. They first exploited. And as it evolved, so yeah, go ahead.
No, it's ionic clay. That's a phrase I've never heard.
There are 2 main types of ore bodies. So every mineral will form into different types of mineralization that are some of them are economically viable to extract material from. So in the rare earths, the main 2 things are bastnäsite and a monazite are the 2 types of ore bodies from which you extract rare earths. Both have a lot of uranium and thorium in them, so they are radioactive. And one of them is often referred to as mineral sands. So mineral sands can also become like a clay. So in China, they referred to them as these ionic clay deposits. Very messy and goopy to try to get material out of, but they figured out a way to do it, and they were off and running. As their own deposits kind of waned, they're still out there. They began to focus more on, look, we don't have to own every mine, but we really want to control all the high value added processing. So, for example, Mountain Pass in California, owned by MP Materials, which is listed on the New York Stock Exchange, they produce a kind of rare earth rich slurry or concentrate, and they send it all to China, and China processes it there. So the Chinese recently have been very, very focused on making sure that they have sufficient input so that they can feed their own industry, right? They have their own manufacturing industry, so it's not just trading material. And that is driving a lot of their demand today. So long and the short of it is, as I began to look at this model and figure out what we're going to put, Western investment together with mining, processing, and end products, whether magnets or alloys or whatever it's going to be, so especially glasses, that kind of thing. I was introduced to, now my chairman and partner, Greg Barnes, who was the chief geologist at Tanbreez. He found it in 2000, staked it, spent $50 million of money on it. Being an exploration geologist, had been involved in many successful discoveries in his career, and realized this is the crowning achievement of a fascinating career. And he was right; it's huge. So I got involved about 6 years ago. You may or may not recall when President Trump offered to buy Greenland.
When you told me that, it struck a chord. I was like, man, I remember hearing about this. But you had to have some serious insight that maybe did not make the news.
No, we left be quiet for a while. So we were basically in the White House briefing staff on the importance of our rare earth mine to U.S. national security because we're privately held, right? We're not listed. So for a listed company, you can go look everything up. It's got to be public information. We are not. So we have been historically fairly reticent about sharing a lot of information. We're getting less so now. But yeah, so we went, spoke to the White House about that. And then a few days later, President Trump offered to buy the country, which I loved for a range of reasons.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, it was great. As a good friend of mine who's been in DC forever said, like, I think you just been the best liar in the world, because I had dinner with him the night before. I said, I hate lobbying. I can't stand going to deal with the government type telling them stuff. And never works out. And he called me. He's like, come on, you had one meeting. You got a president to buy a country. I would say that's a phenomenal track record.
Hell yeah. That's incredible.
It was great. So
put that on your resume.
I know, right?
Yeah, crowning achievement. But tangentially, part of what I loved about the whole Trump presidency is the people that hated him, their brains don't function. I mean, there's a reason they call it Trump derangement syndrome. The next day on all the Sunday news shows, they were going on and screaming about, it's just impossible. You don't buy countries, blah, 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 on and on and on. And what was so great is, like, I'm living in Florida. We bought this. Louisiana purchased, where you are. Right? We bought this. We bought Alaska. And even more specifically in relation to Greenland, he was the 5th president to have this conversation. We almost bought Greenland in 1850 when Alaska was up for sale for $2 million. Congress, for the first and potentially only time, balked at another price when Greenland was for sale for $4 million. And they were like, that's too much. So had they been smarter, like life would be very different. Greenland would have been
no kidding
already. Anyway,
yeah.
Long and short of it is, examining questions is, what we have is this massive ore body of very high quality with no radiation in it, which is very rare. We've got a great relationship with the Greenland government. We've got a great relationship with the people there. We are focused on the majority of jobs being Greenlanders, right? We don't want to be one more foreign company that comes in and tells everyone what to do. And just to give a little perspective on this, big mines, small mines, you will happily open up a mine. And one of the ways you look at it is, what's the life of the mine? How long? Like, you got an ore body of X size with Y quality, you mine at Z rate per year. Well, how long are you done till there's no more ore left? Our ore body is so large that at 3 million tons per year, if we get to mine that at a run rate, which meets currently about 35% of U.S. rare earth demand right now. So just picture that. 3 million tons of raw rock comes down to about 30% of U.S. current demand.
Holy cow.
That demand will get larger over time. But at that rate, my mine, we run out of ore to mine in 800 years. So,
holy shit.
Which means effectively it is limitless, right? We can mine at 5 times that rate if the government lets us, and if we technologically can do it. And our mine alone basically puts a stake through the heart of the Chinese monopoly. And they'll survive, right? Now we'll just have a competitive world, and that's fine. But that's why it's so exciting, and why it's economically very attractive for those involved, and it's very important for all sorts of companies that need these materials for inputs to their products. And a lot of it goes to the military, like laser guidance systems, military, missile systems, planes. I think a submarine takes about 8,000 tons of this material. So, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. I think every jet takes something like 800 kilograms or something. Anyway, that's what we are. It's vast. We're hoping to start production very soon, and we're very happy both from a economic perspective, but also, the world's a better place if there's competition, and having one country be very, very dominant in one thing, whether they think it's good for them or not, in the end, it usually turns out to be better that we have kind of multiple sources for multiple materials, so no one in the world can get too stressed about people owning one thing and being very dominant about it.
Well, what you have is definitely better than sitting on a gold mine.
Yes.
So, what's something about the production value that seems obvious to you guys that are involved, but may not seem so obvious to the layman?
That's a good question, because it's funny, that phrase "a gold mine" is a proverbial saying, right? Oh, it's a gold mine.
Right.
The funny thing is, I don't want your gold mine. Keep it. I've got my rep.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you very much. Well, one of the things that's kind of crucial about it is gold goes into a bunch of different engineering bits and pieces throughout computers and the rest of it. But there are, gold deposits all over the world, so it's not that hard to find. What we've got is critical for everything related to kind of the energy transition, as they refer to it, as advanced alloys, for anything involving moving motors, right? So if you're going to build an industrial plant in the middle of Illinois, well, you can build a 600-ton iron electromagnet, because who cares, right? Space isn't an issue. But if you want something that moves, like a drone or a plane or a car, well, the motor has to be light, right? So you're talking about power density, so more energy output per pound of material, or whatever your metric is. And for those applications, what we have is absolutely critical, right? They've got the critical minerals list that Europe has one, US has one. They largely overlap, and it's because a lot of the advanced stuff, including the equipment that we're recording on, is impossible without some of those materials. And so advanced society just these things are absolutely critical. And so we've got something that will help advance a lot of industrial uses, create entirely new use cases, right? They're new alloys. Like if you look at spinning turbines, for example, right? Those massive ones. If you tried to make those just out of aluminum, that would be too heavy. They would crumble and crush, right? So the gadolinium that we have a lot of goes into a lot of those. Each blade has got a few hundred pounds of it, and without that, you could not get the strength, rigidity, lightweightness that you require. So so many of the things in our lives that we just take for granted just would literally not be possible if we didn't have these. So I would much rather have that than a mine full of a pretty material that's mainly for jewelry.
So the mine that you have, this is operational now and contributing to. Okay.
Nope, it's right now technically a permitted mine. We have an exploitation license, which means it's a long process you have to go through the government to prove the ore body is what you say it is, that the environmental, all that. And the Greenland government has got a very well thought out mining law. Every country has their own. One would argue that the Congo, where cobalt is mined by children in death pits, does not have a mining law or any mining law.
Right.
It's just savagery. So
at gunpoint.
And we it's been fascinating to watch, because one of the things that is most interesting being in the mining industry is that a lot of the folks who would scream on and on about climate change, global warming, pick whatever they call it, and are very much in favor of an energy transition, however they characterize that, they're also kind of live in a child's fantasy world, because they also hate mining. Well, you got to kind of pick. There's no free lunch in this world. If you want this switch to a low carbon intensive energy future, you need what I have and what many other people and many other mines have: nickel, cobalt, all that. But you've got this problem in the U.S., especially, where I think, except for 2 states, like, it is this absurdly onerous process to get a mine permitted. There's one nickel deposit in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. There's one of the richest nickel deposits in the world, and they've been trying to get that thing permitted for 18 years, right? And it's because of the stupidity of Michigan's law. Basically, a rational mining policy would say, Company X has explored this, found this ore body, and they want to turn it into a mine. They're going to come to the legislature and say, here's all the evidence from what we've done. Here's our application. Here's our environmental report. Here's all the reports you want us to have. And now we're going to have a fixed 6-month, 9-month process. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Instead, what you have is this ongoing idiocy where anyone can object, right? So and they're not stupid. They wait. You, Brandon, you show up first to the first town hall meeting and say, my dog Fluffy will lose his mind at the trucks rumbling by. You need to do a seismic study to make sure my dog Fluffy won't lose his mind. And that kicks off a 6-month study process. And guess what happens 5 months and 28 days into that process? You, Zach, show up. My birds will lose their crap if you have drilling and blasting. You got to do seismic studies to show me the drilling and blasting. You get the picture. So they just line up one at a time. A rational process would say, let's take a look at Fluffy, the birds, and everything else all at once, and we'll make a decision as to whether we're going to mine or not. That's how rational countries do this. But for 48 states at least, it's this ridiculous not in my backyard crap. Whereas modern mining, the other thing which is so great, I appreciate objectively, however infuriating it is the anti-mining crowd. When they talk about mining, they take that stock photograph from 1894 of the 8-year-old with the lunch pail covered in coal dust, as if that's reflective of mining today. It's ridiculous. I'm a member of the New York Culture Association. I've been in mines in Kentucky, West Virginia, where I would happily sit down and have lunch on the floor, right? It's clean. It's perfectly clean. There's no more coal dust. There's no more black lung. There's no more, all that. Do I blame the mining industry for not being more aggressively vocal about this, right? What was that Avatar, right? The first one. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Avatar. It was these beautiful, wonderful, magical creatures in this lovely Edenic paradise. And then what was going to ruin the paradise? Mining companies, right? So the anti-mining brigades have got a phenomenal rhythm and pitch to spin their story about how awful mining is. And all we've got is facts, which are like, your life wouldn't exist. You couldn't make that movie if we didn't have a mine. But, we got to get better at telling that story.
Well, you talked about how like Michigan has like the largest. What you said? I think you said nickel. What was
It's
it?
a really
Nickel.
rich nickel deposit, which is necessary for car manufacture. And it's like a rail spur from Detroit. It's madness that it's not permanent.
Okay. So you said like Michigan has the largest nickel. I know there's a lot of different other type of resources and like oil specifically and a whole bunch of other stuff across the United States or right off our shores within our waters that we just don't touch. And it's always kind of what you said, the current, oh, it's going to hurt the environment or we don't want to do anything like that. Do you think maybe that the U.S. government, and I had this idea for a while, do you think maybe the U.S. government uses climate change as the current excuse not to do that so that we pretty much dry up as much resources from outside until those are up? And then when those are all up, the U.S. now would have, having used up all your resources, now has all the leftover resources, if that makes sense, because we hadn't touched it yet.
I like the idea. You're giving these folks way too much credit, right? So if the U.S.
that's what I've been told.
Company, maybe, right? But that's a long-term play stretching across multiple administrations. They certainly use climate change as the boogeyman for absolutely everything, which I could touch on at length later, but I want to keep my blood pressure down. But yeah, no, it's an interesting idea. I mean, we may well end up with having a lot more resources because we didn't exploit them. But I think that result will be an accident more than a deliberate policy. No one's that clever. And quite frankly, you need coordination between the federal government and every state, which has rights. Right? So Florida, all the reason we don't have an income tax is we've got oil and gas rights in the Gulf of Mexico and off the Atlantic shore. So we have revenue from royalties, so we don't need revenue from income tax. Same with other states who have properties in their land.
So I may not understand what all of the minerals in your mine are or where they're used, but are you able to talk about like which ones that the mine has, or is it something that you guys don't divulge? Yeah, just out of curiosity.
It's fine. We're talking about it more. So one of the things that we have, which is somewhat of a gift from God, in that I mentioned the bastosite and the monazite, these two main mineralization types that contain a lot of rare earths. Ours is a third type, which is not as common. It's called the eudialyte, and it has a couple of properties which are great. No uranium or thorium, so no radiation, at least, or to the background level that's in your backyard soil, right? There's always some tiny, but not enough that when you mine it, it turns into a concentrated amount that is actually radioactive. So we have something that's radiation free. It is, aside from the rare earths, there are 13 or 15 of those, depending on who you're talking to. Aside from those, we have massive amounts of zirconium, hafnium, tantalum, and niobium. So zirconium is used in a lot of steel alloys. Hafnium is used in radiation controlling rods for nuclear reactors. Tantalum and niobium are other alloys. So we've got 4 minerals in the deposit that are profitable in and of themselves. Right? So before we mine any of the rare earths, this is rather important. I'll tell you why. So we've got a profitable mine just running and mining the zirconium, hafnium, tantalum, and niobium, which, if you say it fast enough, is the Gilbert and Sullivan refrain. And then
That's awesome.
It is. Then the other thing is that when you look at rare earths, conceptually they're broken into light rare earths and heavy rare earths, and that's just a nomenclature, and based on physical chemistry, it's not worth kind of going into why. But lanthanum, cerium, praseodymium, neodymium, and europium tend to be called the light rare earths. Then everything from gadolinium on through yttrium, which are the last 6 or 7, those are called the heavies. 27 to 30% of the rare earths in our ore body are the heavies, and that matters because the heavies are a lot more expensive. So lutetium will sell for $800 to $2,000 a kilogram, depending upon the market, depending upon the time. Whereas lanthanum and cerium will sell between 80 cents and $2.50 per kilogram. So if you got a lot of lanthanum, that's great, but on a per kilogram basis, you'd rather have what we have. So we have an ore body incredibly rich and the heavies like samarium and gadolinium and yttrium, lutetium. So what we have is an incredibly rich source of the harder to find material that are often used in a very advanced manufacturing, advanced alloys. So because of that, a big chunk of our focus now as we move towards building the mine and getting the end materials out is how do we most efficiently mine this? How do we, most cost effectively mine it? Because in mining, logistics and cost control are everything, right? Anything is doable in theory, right? What's that great old SEALs line that there's no problem in the world that will not move if given enough properly applied high explosives, right? So
Okay.
you can always get it, but can you get it at a cost that's worth it to the market? And we think we can. So it's an important ore body in the sense that one of the Chinese main routes to competition is, say they make gadolinium oxide, right? So that's the thing that they're making a lot of money at. They will wait until a privately owned, a Western owned mine goes into production, and then when my new mine starts to sell gadolinium oxide, the Chinese will then dump that product on world markets, driving the price down, hopefully to put me out of business. But you'll notice I told you I've got a profitable mine before I sell any rare earths. So that means is my cost of production is literally negative. So they can drop prices to zero all day long, and I can still make money by giving it away for a penny a kilogram.
Here comes that proverbial steak you were talking about.
Yeah, so that's it. So it rebalances world trade. It provides a competitive source, and it's just going to make the trading environment better for everyone. They're going to be a little grumpy at first, but in the end, it's going to bring cost discipline to them as well, which will improve their industry.
Just so I can better understand,
I'm kind of surprised that so many people don't.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Rand. I was going to say, you were talking about how like minerals can be radioactive and minerals can like be non-radioactive or whatever, and yours are non-radioactive, which is better. What drives that? Is that just normal, like maybe the Earth's systems? They're too close.
It's the inclusion of
America's nukes or something.
It's inclusive of which elements are in the ore body, right? So the elements in our ore body are rare earths, hafnium, tantalum, niobium, and zirconium in recoverable amounts. The elements that go into a bastazite, for example, don't have any zirconium or tantalum. They don't have any niobium and hafnium, but they do have uranium and thorium. So uranium, thorium, and plutonium are the main radioactive elements, right? They have a half-life, they decay, they give off radioactivity. Go watch Oppenheimer. They'll go through some of that some more, right? So that's why whether they have it's purely a measure of whether they have uranium and thorium in it. It's not impossible to mine those materials. You just need to know how to do it, right? You need to once you start to concentrate it down from the raw host rock, if you got something that has 0.4% uranium in it, well, you can handle that rock perfectly fine. Nothing's going to happen to you. But when you crush it down, extract the uranium, and start to turn it into yellow cake, well, now that's dangerous. You can't be handling yellow cake, right? You need to have lead around it. There's specialty equipment. So it adds cost and complexity and often serious regulation. So if you've got regulation, cost, complexity, and danger that's added into your mining, that just adds cost. And at the best, it adds cost. At the worst, it's dangerous. But we don't have to worry about that. We don't have any of those problems.
No, I was going to say that I'm kind of surprised. The topic of rare earth minerals has come up, like I said, a lot over the past couple of years. But I'm surprised that honestly your mind doesn't come up more often when it talks about advantages or at least things that are on the horizon for the United States to kind of level the playing field. Because you talk to the majority of people and it almost seems like the situation is hopeless. I've heard people bring up a mine in Mexico and about how the United States doesn't do enough to go after this location. It seems like we already have an ace in the hole, so to speak. I'm not sure when production, could begin and how viable, the life support of rare earth minerals in the United States could be without it. But it surprises me because here we are talking about it and this seems, like I said, like that ace in the hole.
Yep. It is. First off, we're privately held, so you don't have to share information to the market as you would if you're a public company. Second, we've now been speaking to 3 different U.S. administrations about this, and only a few months ago, I frankly decided that kind of being quiet publicly wasn't getting them to give me any money anyway. So, kind of basically, I'm now calling the U.S. government out on the carpet in a good way, right? And part of the reason I say that is, unlike China, which has a very command and control economy, right? And the central government tells the banks who to give money to. They control who gets a license. They support their industry. One of the biggest smugglers in China, they built this $1.8 billion processing plant and sold it to him for $1, so that he could then make. Yeah, we talk about industrial policy, right? But as Americans, as a taxpayer, I don't want us to do that. I don't want the U.S. government picking winners and losers. I don't. They have a terrible track record of doing so, right? And of course, everyone like me who's got this incredibly important asset critical to national security says, well, in this instance, we should make an exception, right? And generally, I'm a rock solid, low taxes, strong defense, get the government out of our lives guy. But then all of a sudden, I'm sitting here, and it is a complicated proposition to start any mine, right? And I think part of the reason President Trump offered to buy the country is that it would just be easier for the U.S. to grant me the license than not. But when it comes to the U.S. government just writing checks, I work with a lot of really talented people: Commerce, Energy, Department of State, a couple of different, XM, DFC, a bunch of organizations have close relationships in the government, DOD. And the way the budgetary cycle is set up, there just isn't a slush fund out of which someone can write a check. So, part of my critique has been I haven't wanted to, rock the boat or rattle the cage, right? Milton Friedman, the great economist, his great line was, hell hath no fury like a bureaucrat scorned. So I'm really not pointing any fingers at anyone. Everyone I meet individually is doing a great job and is really thoughtful and trying to find a way to support us. But systemically, the mechanisms just don't exist. Like the Secretary of Commerce doesn't have a random $8 billion slush fund out of which he can write equity checks. And so I think there are some thoughtful ways in which the government is trying to be helpful, right? And they certainly have been, great with us. And the only reason I kind of say I'm, somewhat calling them on the carpet, somewhat facetiously, is if this spurs a little public shaming or a public announcement of like, look, we've been talking to 3 administrations, all of whom say this is really important. The United States government funds all kinds of stuff all over the world. How are we not funding this? I guess is my question. And if that sparks some creativity in the halls of Congress or in the White House, great. Hopefully they can be helpful.
I feel like if I was in a position to be running for public office, especially for the presidency, that you're somebody I'd want to talk to, and then take along for the ride, so to speak, and try to exhibit essentially the sorts of problems that you could solve. And I feel like that would be a really intelligent way of marketing yourself as a leader. So it kind of surprises me, and again, kind of reaffirms the fact that I feel like some of these people don't really want to solve problems for others. Awesome. But it seems like a no-brainer to me, but who am I? So,
well, it's funny, but what you described is a political calculation, right? So that is talking to the politicians about this. I sometimes speak with them, but literally, I much prefer the kind of career staff, right, who actually are working on trying to solve problems, and having evolved slightly, getting clear messaging across on such a complex topic in sound bites that like a senatorial or a presidential candidate could use, it's an art form and it's tricky. So I'm with you all the way, right? Like, and it's, and both of you come up with really great ideas in terms of, well, surely if someone who had the understanding and the checkbook heard this, well, why is this even an issue? And And it's not absolutely completely their fault in a sense. We found all the financing we needed. First, we spent our own money, and then to build the mine, we found all the financing we needed in early 2020. And then an irony fit for the ages, the guy who was stepping up to fund the next chunk of development caught the Wuhan virus and died 5 weeks after agreeing to fund us.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, that was tragic. And he was a great
Convenient.
American patriot. Great guy. You can't make it up. And then the world threw this virus hysteria, which everyone tries to forget now, but like it's stopped rational conversations for 18 to 20 months at least.
Absolutely.
So in terms of whether we're on track or not, yeah, I think we are. We're having the right conversation. We've got the right technical partnerships, and the capital formation is happening. So we'll get it in motion soon. Hopefully, I'd rather start sooner than later. And that to me is the place where not just the U.S., but I've seen other democratically elected governments kind of add a little value, give a little nudge to get the cart going. Right? We could use that little, primer in the gas tank right now. But the private sector usually moves faster than the government. So we'll just, we have every conversation, and any one of them could say yes. We're in due diligence to the number of people who will join us in this journey. We'd love it if there was some portion of the federal government that could be part of it, and hopefully they can. Right? I've seen stranger things. I grew up in a family of government military contractors, so it's a weird process, right? It's nothing, 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 and then bounty. So that's where we are.
So what rare earth minerals is the United States most poor in?
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah, I mean, we've got MP Materials out west has got the first 4 lights, so lanthanum, cerium, and then a little bit of praseodymium and neodymium. But aside from that, there are a few deposits here and there sprinkled throughout the Western Hemisphere in general, and part of the headache is that all of them, like we're so large, we could justify building our own entire processing facilities, right? And that's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars. But if you've got a mine that might have a rich deposit, but it's got a life of mine of like 12 years, like the economics don't work. You can't afford. You're not going to build your own processing infrastructure. So then it comes down to, well, the only game in town is what the Chinese have demanded, which is that you send your material to them. And amazingly enough, they strip a lot of the margin out of it. So you've got a lot of things that are physically possible, but are right now economically not possible. That's all of mining is about making sure that you can get this stuff out of the ground cost effectively.
Absolutely. Well, as you said before, competition is healthy and a good thing. I'm just glad that we've got this, gives us an edge with the Chinese, because sometimes it feels like we're falling behind. So,
yeah, I'm a little less apocalyptic about the Chinese. Like I don't criticize people for working hard and competing, right? In a few places, do they cut corners? Yeah. But all the American Industrial Revolution was based on industrial espionage against the Europeans and stealing their tech. So I'm not going to cry about that. And they work really, really, really hard. Their educational system is different. It's heavily focused on material science and kind of expertise in engineering. And they're not, again, generically speaking, the way they've molded society, arguably in like the 80s and 90s. I've heard from people who lived there then. China was as open as Paris or New York, right? There was none of this, paranoia of committees and social scores and all this crap. That was a regressive step that President Xi took. So, everyone I work with, out of China, a bunch of guys that good friends of mine went to business school with, like individually, hardworking, really hardworking, like really, really hardworking, and they've earned their spot in the sun. And they've got demographic issues from their one-child policy, and they've got severe societal pressure from the fact that they can't hide from their own people what they're doing to the Uyghurs. Like, they got a lot of problems, and they've decided to, erroneously, I believe, in spite of everything they should know about history, including their own, is like, tamping down on society never works.
No,
never works, right? And eventually it erupts. So I think they're overextended. because of a one-party system that where the government demanded banks lend to things like construction projects and industrial projects, many of which a Western bank would never invest in because you couldn't see a return on investment. I think they're in a much more fragile state. So as a boogeyman for the politicians to play around with, it's great, but a lot of America is reindustrializing in relation to
That's
not.
good.
Yeah, you have to. So I mean, that's that. I'll shut up here, but that is my overarching goal: is the reindustrialization of the United States, because the problems we see with disaffected young men and heroin addiction and suicide, all of that is because all the jobs that strong young men used to have in this country, a lot of them were taken away and shipped overseas. Also, we could buy cheap DVDs at Walmart, and that shit's got to end. And that's part of what we're focused on.
Absolutely. And I couldn't agree more with what you said. Just the way that their minds work with working hard and putting the effort in, it definitely outpaces the United States right now. I feel like young people in our country are not focused on those sorts of things. And you can't blame them for their industrialness. And in many ways, objectively, right, it's something to be admired. And I think that what you said too about reindustrializing our country is such an important step in kind of pulling us out of this nihilistic doldrums, right? It kind of seems like we're in. But it's something that the American innovative spirit has always been there. And I feel like we've always found a way to do this. So, you, like you said, you're a piece of that puzzle. I feel like absolutely. But one thing I definitely, wish is more people would see those things in the United States as the opportunity that it really does hold, and pay attention less to the naysayers, because it is so evident to, if you pay attention, to see how the United States still is very much a land of opportunity.
Yeah, you bet. I mean, you guys are, and your age cohort. What has been your experience of the guys that who are not in the military, in the private sector? What are they doing? Is it everyone's got a really great job, in something really useful, or some of them are doing jobs they would rather be doing something else? I mean, what's your sense of the kind of private market for guys your age?
Well, I have a few friends, family members who own their own businesses. And they either came by them through familial ties or they built it from the ground up. And considering they're my age, I'm 36 years old, and they have built a business from the ground up. When people tell me that the American dream is dead, that you can't do these things, I could point to people that I know in my life that prove that wrong.
Yeah.
And we are not without our problems, and that's the truth. No country is. But to sit there and say that it's dead is not true at all. And I think there's just not enough people anymore that want to put the work in to do this. And whether it's going to school and getting a degree, becoming a nurse, something like that, right? You can make so much money doing that. It's a lot of work. And it's something to be admired, but you can still do these things, and you have the freedom to choose to do those things. So the drug problems, like you talked about, I mean, I live out here in California. It's honestly, it's sad, incredible, ridiculous, all the adjectives you can come up with, the negative connotations. Yep. And but there's so much untapped potential, I feel like, in people, the millennials my age, right? We can be very industrious. We grew up both ways, playing outside and coming in and playing video games and on the computer.
Yep.
And so we understand, I feel like a lot of people my age tend to understand both sides, right? My parents made me go outside and play. My parents made me do things on my own. But at the same time, I understand how a computer works, right? So this generation has a ton of potential, understanding hard work and then understanding the technological aspects of it, and having the mind to get into it and learn and not be afraid of it. So I see a lot of people. I try to surround myself with people who want to be industrious and take care of their families. So, but I mean, what you, Zach, you may have a different experience.
Well, I was going to kind of touch on what you said about putting in the hard work. Like, I think a lot of younger Americans today, they see like what their parents have or like what their older friends have or whatever. And they just assume that because they're in America, they're just supposed to get to that step immediately. Like that's where they start.
Right.
And I don't think they realize that there's a lot of time and effort that went into that. Like my little sister, She lives in Portland, Oregon, and she's got a good paying job. She's got a degree, all this type of stuff. She did everything right. And then she was complaining about how she's like, oh, I'll never be able to buy a home. I can't buy a home, all this type of stuff.
Right.
And I was confused by that because her current rental, like, I think it's like $2,600 something a month. And in my mind, I'm like, you could definitely buy a home. Like, there's mortgages less than that.
Yep.
And then her counter argument is, well, you'll never find a home for like that price in Portland. I went, me being the analytical, I'm going to like prove you wrong person. I immediately went to Zillow. I found like 100 and something homes that are for sale in that price range. But the thing is that they're not like really nice shiplap walls. They're not like the clean, modern kitchens with like the nice stuff, They're older homes that probably need some TLC, whatever, but it's still a home. And I don't think like people realize like the home Gresham's parent owns, or the home my dad owns, he just finished building himself like this year. He's 60 something and he now has his dream home, but he worked his butt off to get to that. I don't like the home I grew up in did not have like nice cabinets. It did not have like all like, I'm pretty sure there was like a beam in the, like, I remember a beam being in like the kitchen and it just like was rotting and went all the way across the ceiling. Like you have to put in hard work to get stuff and the hard work will pay off. And I think a lot of current generation, they just expect to be at the finish line because I think their whole time, oh, we're in America, it's the greatest country ever, all this type of stuff. So in their mind, they're thinking, it's kind of like when the big immigration was coming to the United States and people used to joke that, oh, the roads are made of gold and all that type of stuff, right? And then they get there and it's like, no, it's not. New York City stinks like piss and it's no gold anywhere. But it's that perception. It's a perception. They think they should already start at the end. They don't realize how good they have it currently. Like the poorest American is like the top 2%, 3% or something like that of like the richest in like the world. Yes. And they'll be sitting there complaining about how they can't buy a home while they're tweeting on their $1,000 phone and watching NFL Monday Night Football on their 4K TV with no interruptions, with running water, and can go down the street and get food whenever they want. So it's like it's just perception, I think, is the big issue.
I would totally agree. I've been saying for years that whoever it is, you get elected to Senate, Congress, any office, whatever, or you get appointed to a senior level position or any civil service position in the federal government, we instantly choose a spot on the map and we fly you to say somewhere in, let's call it Namibia. Let's call it Congo, right? Okay. Drop you off with $100, no identifying papers, and say, we're going to pick you up in 30 days in Brazzaville. Go. And if you make it, great. You get to take your seat in Congress. But oh my, will you have a very different perspective on the world?
No kidding.
Yep. And I don't care where it is. It's dropped you in Laredo, Texas with $100 and no identification and no way to get it, and no phone. And you got to make it to, Fargo. Similar.
Right.
Tricky. It's going to be tricky. Can you do it? You're right. People just have no sense. And there is an entire, competitive poverty industry in this country that there are people making money off of whining victimhood. Right there, you whine a lot. You elect people to Congress who tell you how shitty the country is, and then they vote to give you goodies, and you take it. And there's a lot of that. I still remain encouraged because we grew up in New York, and then we moved. As I said, we left New York and moved to America, and
I'll be back one day.
I'm encouraged by the younger people I see, because kids in high school, and I see a lot of hardworking folks. I see, 2 jobs, doing ROTC, whatever it is, they're applying themselves. So, well, the media on both sides, Fox likes to point to useless, lazy whiners who sit around and do nothing but tweet, insults about America, and then everyone else, also tweets about them, but like says they're like, you know, unhelped victims that require government assistance forever. I think all of that should be ignored. Funnily enough, you know, kind of on that in terms of you both pointed out is it's that manipulation and perception, which is what I just urge everyone to try to avoid. We're now coming up on the third election where people are going to vote against someone, not for someone. And that is just so awful for this country. If these two old dinosaurs go at it again, I mean, enough with the boomers. Go home, bake cookies for your grandchildren. Shut up. There's nothing more embarrassing. I'll say it. You know, I have all the respect for Janet Yellen or the work that Janet Yellen has done in her career. At this point, the absurdity of an 83-year-old great grandma warbling about cryptocurrency as the head of the Treasury is an embarrassment. It's ridiculous.
It is.
It's ridiculous. We look like idiots. This is the most qualified person in America to run the Treasury? Are you kidding me?
If you cornered her,
you probably find a 20-year-old to be way better at it.
Yeah, if you cornered her and asked her without anybody to assist her to explain to you what blockchain meant, she probably couldn't do that.
No clue. So part of what we're all battling is the damn boomers. And actually, I split that up because I refer to the draft dodger generation, which is the half of the boomers that dodged Vietnam and hid out in universities. And it was I have this debate a lot, and it causes some ruffled feathers, but I stick to it. With the massive exception of slavery, the single stupidest policy this government ever did was the educational draft deferment in Vietnam. Because if you go to any university in the country, right, every chapel or memorial, you've got, depending how old the university is, right? Revolutionary War, Civil War, World War I, World War II, Korea. And half of them don't have a fucking plaque for Vietnam because no one went. Or if they were, there were 3 where the names for Korea were there 200, right? And so what happened in effect was this stupid idea was if your daddy could pay for you to go to, you know, idiot state, you went and you did 4 years and all of a sudden, holy shit, the war's still going on. Well, I guess I got to get a master's degree. 2 years later, oh my God, the war's still going on. My number's up. I got to go. I got to report for duty. Oh, well, I guess I got a PhD. So basically, the American people ended up with a bunch of cowards, left-leaning cowards, who became the professorial class. And from an anthropological perspective, and this drives me nuts, from an anthropological perspective, every society has ceremonies of adulthood, right? So some of them are very explicit, like 19-year-old 10-day circumcision ceremonies, and among the Zulu, for example, right? There are ceremonies that mark the transition to adulthood. Every draft dodger, by definition, never became a man because he never stood up and took the responsibilities that men take in the society. So you got a bunch of overeducated children who have been tenured professors for 40 years teaching Marxist drivel to our children. And that's why we've ended up with the shit we're in right now. And we need to reverse that. So that's lot.
That's the sound clip of the episode right there. Hell yeah.
There you go.
Wrap that up.
That's it.
And a nice little bow. Ship it.
It's the worst thing that's ever happened to this country. And they're still in fucking power. And they got to go. They got to go. Enough.
So Zach and I have had this conversation before. What would you say to some sort of mandatory either military or civil service prior to anything else, like public office, right?
I would do it right now. And if they said to me, you're 53, I'd say, great, I will go fucking do it the best I can. If I pass out, they'll throw ice on me. And everyone, I can let it. But
change your socks.
What's hilarious is exactly when I got out of college in '93 and went and spoke to the Navy, and peace had broken out completely and utterly. Right. So they love my test scores. They love the degree. They love Arabic skills. They loved all that. And, the guys I spoke to, one was a recruiter, obviously. And he's just like, I don't know what we're going to be doing. History ended. The Berlin Wall is falling, like it's all over. And then, fast forward and I'm, walking away from the Trade Center on 9/11. So I got out of this weird period where I looked at the military, but like they weren't hiring. So, uh, and I was more than happy to go do service then, and I didn't. But yeah, I think that sort of national cohesiveness, and that encompasses everything, as you pointed out. It doesn't have to be picking up a gun. If you're a Quaker and you are morally against, fine, great, we'll find something else for you to do. But 2 years of a little bit of training, get rid of some of that belly fat. Wake up when someone tells you to, not when you want to. I think that's stunning for everybody.
I agree. Yeah, I would like to hear. I mean, Zach, unless you have something else to add to that, but about
I was just gonna say I agree with your perception thing. We kind of going a little bit further back, like you being like tricked by perception or whatever. Because before I joined the Air Force, all I knew was Monroe, Washington, and a little bit of like Seattle and Everett and stuff.
Yep.
Then I was in Japan for 3 years and was like, whoa, what the heck? And then I was in South America, then the Middle East, then Africa, and all this type of stuff. So yeah, definitely perception goes into it. And then when I became a recruiter, up to that time, new era be coming and be like, why are they letting these freaking jackwagons in here? These guys are a bunch of idiots. Like, what the heck? Yada, yada, yada. I was sound like a typical NCO, like back in my Air Force, all this type of stuff. And then I became a recruiter and I was like, no. Yeah. Right. Then I became a recruiter and I was like, oh, wait a minute. This all makes sense. Never mind. Like, I now have this perception. But yeah, no, I think I'm going to steal Brandon's thunder because I think I know where he was going. But you talked about how you walked out of the Twin Towers on 9/11. Yeah, steal your thunder, Brandon. What was that like? You were there the day pretty much that's the day American foreign policy changed, the world changed, like the TSA, which as mighty as they are, which they suck, was now about to be erected. Yeah. Like, this is the day all these things change. What was that day like? Firsthand knowledge of being at Ground Zero.
It was, well, luckily I actually had a breakfast meeting scheduled for 9:30 in Tower 2 on September 11th at Bridge Data Services. And that was moved the last minute to the 13th, so 2 days later. And I was in Midtown, and now I lived in North Africa before. I lived in South Africa, so Islamic terrorists had tried to kill me 3 times already. So I'd lived through 3 bombings before September 11th. They didn't get me. And they weren't
hitting me. You were going to own a precious mine.
You're like the modern unsinkable Molly Brown over there.
Yeah, so maybe so far. So I was interviewing someone, and my assistant came in and said, a plane just flew into the World Trade Center, and I instantly knew. This is not a mistake. And so went outside, and at the time we were living in Brooklyn Heights, right across the Brooklyn Bridge. And my wife at the time had the habit of going over the bridge and walking around Lower Manhattan, then coming back up right around that time. So cell phone communication went out. I came out of the building, was staring down Fifth Avenue when the second plane hit, and then just started sprinting south as people were sprinting north, because all I had in my mind was finding out whether my wife was all right. And so I was just sprinting straight down, and the cops were trying to get people to go north. But there was all such chaos that, like they give a shit. Some idiot wants to run towards us and go right ahead, right? So, and by the time I'd already gotten there, they'd already come down, and the smoke and the gas everywhere. So I remember having the strangest thought. So then I walked over the Manhattan Bridge to get to Brooklyn. And I remember all of those videos you see from World War II of all these people, these refugees, walking along like in suits. And I remember I don't know if I formulated the thought, but all of a sudden it came into clarity, like, yeah, they're wearing suits because they didn't expect to be refugees today. Right? This wasn't like you planned for it. Right? Shit. Someone just invaded my country, dropped bombs, and I'm getting away from it, and I'm wearing what I'm wearing. Because buddy of mine I do business with is a former Ranger. Says he goes and shoots at the range all the time, and he goes wearing his suit from work, and people like look at him like, you're at the range, like why are you wearing a suit? He's like, because I train like I fight. I don't know when it's going to happen. So
Yeah.
no one's going to give me time to put on comfy clothing. Anyway,
Makes sense.
and then I got over the bridge. My wife was fine, and we were there on the promenade when the other two smaller towers came down, and the dust was coming across, and mainly I've forgotten most of it because it was so awful. But seeing people flying out of the sky, and the most thing I remember was that once we got into Brooklyn, so people who weren't there, they went the first place they could to get off Manhattan Island, right? But they weren't supposed to be there. They were supposed to be on Long Island or New Jersey or wherever. And the storekeeper just opening the doors and handing out water. And one of the guys owned a shoe store, managed a shoe store. Remember this? We got in a huge fight with the owners of the chain in subsequent years because these people are pouring across, especially women, like they ditched their high heeled shoes, right? And then they're walking barefoot and they're cut up. So he's just giving them sneakers. Like, what the fuck are you gonna do? It's a war zone at this point. And of course, rather than the company who owned it, claiming that under insurance, they tried to prosecute him for theft for giving away. I mean, it's just even those tiny little moments, exactly like these tiny little moments.
Dude's a hero.
We watched. Then we lived right downwind of it, and I had a balcony in Brooklyn Heights, and dust and ash rained down for weeks afterwards. So it was awful, and it's the one thing I remember vividly, which hopefully I still to this day would love to meet this prick. I was walking on September 13th in Lower Manhattan, like kind of up, near the Village, I guess. And someone had decided that this is the time to be like really clever and Gandhi-esque, and had written on this big sheet, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, and put it up. And I looked around and I found half a brick, and I hurled that brick right through that fucking window. And I stood waiting. I wasn't running away. I was waiting. I wanted the prick to come out. There was no one home. So if anyone listening to this, if you're that prick, please, I'm more than happy to have this conversation, 22 years later.
Get you on the show.
Didn't Richard Gere say some stupid shit like that too, like right after?
Sure he did. So it was a really bad day. A lot of people died, and I've just got no patience for. We got very little patience for anyone that has anything remotely equivocal to say about that day. There was just no reason for it. It's not a military target. At the end of the day, for all his faults, Osama bin Laden was not stupid. He got exactly what he wanted. He got an animus on the West by having American boots on what were deemed to be Islamic soil. He has driven us straight into bankruptcy. He got exactly what he wanted. In large measure,
I said the same thing.
He won. He won.
Yeah. No, I couldn't agree more with that. I've said that before, that he did. What he was trying to do, change the world, change the United States, put all these different shackles on us. It 100% worked in more ways than one. And he didn't live to see us leave and this end. But thank God, somebody put bullets in him. But in a lot of ways, a lot more people died that didn't need to because of that. And it is. It's. I mean, no one our age can forget where they were when that happened. And it is one of the most. And as a millennial, we lived through a lot of really serious, life-changing things. But that one is 100% the one that changed everybody's lives completely and totally. But right up there, in a different way with 2020, the way it changed the world in that way. But it really did. So. And I could tell you right now, I was my dad was stationed in Japan. I was about to go to bed with the time difference.
Right.
I used to wake up with the TV in my room coming on to VH1 at like 5 a.m. And I was programming it, and AFN was on. And I don't know, 14-year-old brain was like, oh, they're showing a movie, right? Because it's at night, and that's what AFN does. And turned my TV off. The alarm went on. Woke up, threw my Army JROTC uniform on, and went downstairs. My parents were like, "You're not going to school today, buddy." And I was like, "What's going on?" Like, go change and we'll tell you. And I can remember it vividly, and I'm sure Zach does too. It's just one of the most defining moments in our lives.
Yeah, both my parents worked, and so they were already at work. I was on the West Coast. They were already at work doing their thing or whatever. I don't think either of them knew that it happened before they went to work. We didn't watch the news in the morning. They didn't really listen to the radio. So they just went to work. And I did a normal routine. I was in third grade. So I woke up, had my little like Fruit Loops or whatever. I remember being a fruit cereal. I don't remember if it was Fruity Pebbles or Fruit Loops. It was a fruit cereal.
Pebbles.
And then I agree. Got my brother Colin ready to go to school too. And we walked to school. And I remember that day being kind of quiet. Like there was way less traffic. The cross lady wasn't there to help us cross the street. And I was kind of like, it's kind of weird. I get all the way to school, and school was like empty. And I went up to Mrs. Combs' class, and she had the news playing. Yeah. She had the news playing. I remember exactly what she looked like too. We used to call her a witch because she like a short, stubby girl. She always wore black all the time and had like curly hair and a big nose. She's a witch. And so we were, it was like me, like four other kids in this class. They normally had like 30, 40 kids.
Who hadn't heard.
And then they,
you're right.
Yeah. And then they put us all into the assembly or into like the assembly gymnasium or whatever. And then they told us our parents were coming. And the whole time I was just like, little me, I was like, because two towers fell? I was like, okay, that's weird. And then later on, my dad like trying to explain to me, like, no, like America was attacked. Like, this is enemies. He's like, it's not good. And I was like, oh. And then 5 put 2 together.
Yeah.
Every day.
Very.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Saw a lot less of my dad from that point forward. So.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Air Force is probably in like FPCon Delta for like months.
Well, so I lived up the street from, my best friend, and we didn't go to school. And my parents, even still that day, were very loose about letting us run around the base because it's pretty safe. So we did. We walked the 10 blocks, me and my brother, down, and we had to pass one of the gates. And there's a tank right there at the gate, and I was like, holy shit, like awestruck and a little like, wow, that's amazing and badass, at 14, I'm like, it's a fucking tank, but at the same time, in retrospect, it's like, that's how serious, right? Yeah. Yeah. The Air Force doesn't have tanks, right? So they overnight had that come down from somewhere just to put it right there, and
the Marine camp,
so yeah,
probably.
definitely. Right. Well, I think we're a little closer to one of the Army posts, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, I did at Delta. My dad, intel for 24 years, went to carrying a gun, standing around doing other things. So just changed everything for my family. And then, a lot of my friends through the rest of high school, their lives changed too. Parents dying, having to leave, all that kind of stuff. So it's very different and unique way to grow up.
I'm sure.
So Chris, there was obviously a lot of people died that day. And then still thousands died afterwards from like health effects, whatever. It's kind of more, I guess, of a personal question, but you were there. Do you suffer from any like health issues from 9/11? You or your wife or anything, or no?
I fully expect it's going to take 15, 20 years of my life at the end of the day. We breathe that in. I've been fairly fortunate in that certainly it damaged my breathing, and then I caught COVID, which made that worse. But predominantly, I got lucky. So far as I'm concerned, every day above ground's a good day. And it just, one of the guys I knew well, and as you well know, in the military, like, so there's no predictability in how people will deal with trauma, right? I reiterate this constantly, partially because of the work I do now, but just in general, that whenever someone says PTSD, I correct them. I said, there's no D. The D makes it sound like there's something wrong with someone. If you've gone through serious trauma, you are impacted by it. Some people shake it off better than others. I've got no idea why, right? And one of the guys I worked with subsequently, he was standing on the middle floor. So where the second plane hit, they still didn't know what had happened to the other tower. It was only like 12 minutes between them. And so just picture this. He's standing here in the coffee room, having a cup of coffee. And what he later finds out, he is standing right next to one of the steel reinforced bulwark walls on that floor, right? Why would you know that if you're just in an office, right? He's drinking coffee, and he's talking to someone normal distance, they're 3 feet in front of him, having a conversation. And as he's sipping coffee, a wall of fire just takes that person away. The plane had hit and exploded, and if there were 800 people on that floor, 2 lived. He walked away without a scratch.
Holy shit.
Just, and I mean, just think about that. Like just out of nowhere, you
can't imagine
building. And he stood there in shock.
Survivor's guilt's got to kill him.
So,
mm-hmm.
Maybe. I mean, from what he very religious man, so he whatever he gets through it. But he said, I watched this wall of fire incinerate somebody, and then I stood there with a cup of coffee in my hand. And he's like, it's the little things you remember. Like he's like, I tried to put it down carefully for some reason, right? And then he looked. And where there wasn't pure incineration, there was just hundreds of bodies. And he looked around, and he just walked to the nearest stairwell and walked down and out, and just kept walking north up Manhattan. Eventually stopped, I guess, but a lot of stuff like that. And it's the fact that we live in a world full of evil, and we've got a lot of people who don't believe in it or deny that it's there or don't know what the reasons are. But I put emotion a lot, right? I know that I speak to lots and lots of guys younger than you too, who they this is the world they grew up in, right? You can I was just talking to someone the other day. He had a full 20-year career in the Air Force. His entire career was fighting in Afghanistan. Right? Yeah. That was his life, from 18 to 38. It's kind of incredible that we were there all this time, and then the withdrawal was such a colossal clusterfuck that is a disgrace in the annals of military non-history. It's agonizing, right? So we do what we can do in our private.
Yeah, it's like if people they did 20 years after that and stuff like that in the military. I think. Obviously, other than the World War II generation of veterans, I think the generation of veterans after, for the GWAT era, they weren't drafted, anything like that. These are people who still serve their country, knowing their country's at war and that they're going to go to war. And I think that 20 to 25 year stint of veterans are some of the greatest veterans of the United States of America, for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I'm
I love that take.
I'm honored to be able to help them and their families because I just think, I speak to, I guess that's what are the current statistics of recruiter? With something like 23% of military age young men and women could pass the test to get into the military right now. I mean, that's a national fucking disgrace. Quite frankly, you talked about national service earlier. I know that for some of the cohorts, they were so out of shape, they extended basic training 8 weeks, right? And in large measure, I'm a major fan. 100% of military-aged men and women should do 2 years of service. And if 1 year of it is basically fat camp, good for you. The nation just did you a favor. We got you in shape. We taught you a little discipline. We taught you good nutrition. You should thank us. The least you can do is dig a road.
No, exactly. I watched a video recently of a gym class from 1952, and just it's wild. Like they got this whole obstacle course out there that these guys are doing, and there's not a difference between any one of them and how efficiently they're making their way through this obstacle course.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't see that today, that's for sure. And you probably have a bunch of kids act like you were targeting them and all kinds of shit now.
Mhm.
But it's wildly different.
And that's a choice. That's a societal choice that if we allow the whiners and the complainers to run things, you get useless, whiny people. If you demand accountability and responsibility of children, they rise to the occasion. This coddling of these little it is the worst thing ever. And hopefully we try to fix that in terms of where you are, you raise your kids correctly, and in some places they just look at it very differently, and they raise these whiny, useless brats who you're doing them no service by telling them they're victims. I don't know what the goal of this crap is, except for a docile, obedient, subservient population that act like slaves. That's what the goal is.
It goes into that cycle where it's like strong men create good times create weak men create hard times create strong men. We're currently in the easy times make weak men, and then weak men going into hard times.
I think the weak men are making hard times. Yeah.
But, gentlemen, I thank you guys. This great conversation. Is there anything I have missed that it ended up being your show?
I guess it's our show. Let's call it that. Maybe we'll call it "I Came with a Mess" or something like that, or "Messy Fire." I don't know. Yeah,
I came with messy fire.
But yeah, So I like to ask this of some people, especially those who've definitely had a more fulfilling life than others, or have more experience. Right? Is if you could go back in time and tell 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old Chris something, what would you tell him?
Oh man.
Buy Greenland.
Invest in Yahoo. Buy Greenland,
You think I tell them the lottery ticket numbers for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
It's
got to be pensive.
But it's funny. I've often thought of that, and I think I might actually have had an answer for that 10 years ago. But I'm getting to a point in my life where everything good and bad that happened got me here, and
like you said.
I just you
don't want to mess it up.
Experience comes from making bad choices, right? And you only make good choices with experience. And so, I think about it hard because every parent tries to convey it to children, but there's a reason why we learn experientially and we don't learn by being told it. And so, I don't quite know what I could have told that bullheaded knucklehead. I really don't. Because
that's a good answer.
You want to know something? He knew fucking everything. He knew a lot more than I know now. Straight. He was a lot surer about things than I am now.
That's what my dad told me when I was in high school. He's like, just move out now while you know everything. Move out now. Yeah. Just go.
I think that's part of the cycle. I don't. I can think about it a lot.
My dad used to tell me that he forgot more than I'll ever know. So.
Also totally possibly true. So I wish I had a better answer. I just
no, that was a really good answer. Most everybody has something that's really deep and meaningful, but I agree. Your experiences are what make you who you are today. And if you're happy with who you are, I mean, why would you go back and try and alter anything? So I do. I like your answer, and I appreciate you coming on and talking to us. I know it's been a journey.
Yeah, no doubt. I appreciate it. It's really awesome. Thank you for taking the time, and thank you for your service. Keep it up. I'm glad you're enjoying it.
I appreciate your support.
Just phenomenal.
I'm going to give a quick shout out to our sponsors real fast. Red Clover Coffee, obviously amazing guys, veteran-owned business, donate to a lot of really great charities. If you like coffee, which the majority of us do, especially with the vets that listen to this show, head on over to their website, redclovercoffee.com. You can use code CAMEWITHFIRE to get 10% off your entire purchase. Or if you are into the more violent disciplines, MMA, shooting, or you survive violent circumstances, head on over to Sheep's Clothing LLC. Get yourself some merch, a flag, some MMA gear. you can use code FIRE10 at checkout again to get 10% off your purchase. By supporting them, you support us, vice versa. So please go on over there, show them that you appreciate us and you appreciate them. So thank you to Red Clover Coffee and Sheep's Clothing LLC.